Welcome back. A day after U.S. President Joe Biden's address in the war-torn capital of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a nuclear warning to the West, cautioning the United States of stoking the war into a global conflict. President Putin suspended Russia's participation in the new START treaty. Now, what is the START treaty? It's the last major arms control treaty between the two nuclear superpowers. The new START treaty was signed back in 2010 and was extended for 5 years till 2021 after President Biden took office. The treaty caps the number of strategic nuclear warheads that US and Russia can deploy, as both superpowers hold over 90% of the world's nuclear warheads. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken labeled Russia's move to suspend participation in nuclear arms control treaty as irresponsible and that US would closely watch Moscow's actions. Let's listen in to what President Putin had to say earlier.
The United States withdrew from the agreement. It's now a thing of the past. Our relations, which is important, have degraded, have decreased, and it's something of the United States doing. It is them, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, started reconsidering the outcomes of the World War II, building the world American way, where there is only one master, one Lord. I have to say that Russia is stopping its participation in the treaty about strategic offensive weapons.
Joining me now here on the program today this evening is Ksenia Kondratieva, who's a journalist from Russia. Very good evening. Thanks for joining us here on Mirror Now, ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you on the program to get an understanding of the developments that we are tracking very closely. And I'm referring to the address made by President Vladimir Putin. In a way, from where I stand, the way it's looking right now is that Putin is shirking responsibility for waging war. In fact, he says that the West is stoking tension and Russia wants to end it. In fact, if I can quote him, he says it is them who are culpable for the war. We are using force to stop it. Now, is that not, in a way, turning the tables on the US, blaming the other side now for a war that was, by all accounts, initiated by Russia?
Thanks for having me. First of all, the quote is correct. That's what he said, but that's not the first time that he says it, maybe in a different words. Vladimir Putin has been very clear that Russia is not fighting the war with Ukraine, that Russia's relations with the West have deteriorated, and he has, over the last 1 year, you have to look at all of his speeches. That's what he has been talking about and raging at the West for being sort of deaf to Russia's concerns. You look at Valdai's speech last year, where he said that Russia patiently tried to negotiate such conditions that will be acceptable to everyone, including Russia, but Russia didn't get any response to that. The West was deaf, and that's where we stand now. That's the outcome. This conflict in Ukraine is the outcome.
Because, the entire responsibility is now placed on the West, and by West is Mr. Putin specifically referring to the United States. The other issue here is that, do you believe that President Putin in some way also rattled by the economic sanctions? He says it is impossible to defeat Russia on the battlefield. The existence of our country is at stake, and the West is trying to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, almost to suggest that since a defeat on battlefield is not possible, therefore a strategic defeat is being planned by the West on Russia.
That's exactly what he meant. He has spoken about sort of a hybrid war, that war is raged, that the West is trying to destroy Russia military, economically, politically. But what does he mean by politically? He means, you have to understand that he is addressing the nation, right? So he has to explain why Russia is doing what it is doing in Ukraine. because it has to invoke certain sentiments among Russian people.
Yes.
Not all of them are happy. I don't know anyone who is happy with whatever is happening in Ukraine, because it's a bloody war and people are dying from both sides, right? By raging at the West and saying that the West is trying to destroy the country from within, he means the influence that the West has on, on the media, on the society, because the West has been financing both the media and the, let's say, opposition movements. It has not been successful. And you can see that, of course, there is a certain level of censorship in Russia, and the laws have been toughened since the beginning of what Russia calls a special operation, which is understood because the country is at war. But you should see the ratings of Vladimir Putin growing, at least as per the official data. And I think what's important is, Western leaders competing to visit Kiev and to announce more and more help, more weapons. And with yesterday's visit of the US president, there was nothing else left for the Russian president to comment on, because the sentiments in Russia are quite clear that it's the war with the West.
Okay, that's important. You're saying it's a war with the West. It's a war with the West insofar as Russia is concerned. But what is most concerning at the moment is the fact that Mr. Putin has announced that he suspends participation of Russia in the nuclear arms control treaty. Now, that is sure to ring alarm bells, isn't it? He's also added that the West is trying to turn a local conflict into a global conflict. And in that narrative, to say that I have decided to suspend participation in nuclear arms control treaty should be alarming, should be concerning to the world at large.
Yes, definitely. It should be concerning to everyone. No doubts about that. I think in the days to come, we will have more sort of insights on how it really, what practically, it means. Because I think the most concerning part is the possibility of the nuclear test. Again, Vladimir Putin said that Russia has some information that such things, then the returning to nuclear testing is possible, is considered by the US, and if they do it, Russia will do it as well. So I think this is something, because for decades, this planet has lived without nukes being tested. This is something very alarming.
Yes. Which is why we are running those figures, just to give our viewers an idea of the number of warhead inventories that Russia and US hold. It's 90% of the world's nuclear warheads. So for one of those two big countries to say that we will not sign up for anything that binds us to an arms control treaty is extremely worrisome. I want to ask you one last question on what Mr. Putin said about working to free the Ukrainian people. Now, this is interesting. Both sides, both US and Russia, claim that we are fighting for the interest of the Ukrainian people. You mentioned a short while ago that to a large extent is also addressing the domestic audience in Russia. Is this something that you think is targeted at the Russian people?
The way you see the ongoing conflict from the Russian perspective is very different from how you see it from the Western perspective, or how the Western media at large and the Western leaders are trying to portray this conflict. They try to portray it as Mr. Putin's, they use the word obsession with Ukraine and strive for imperialistic interest. But since the very beginning, and again, I refer to his speech on February 24, 2022, when he sent the troops to Ukraine, he was sticking to this point that Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian people are led by the government that is a puppet government, of course, I'm not quoting him directly, that is a puppet government of the West, of the US, and the Ukrainian people are taken hostages. And that's what many in Russia truly believe here.
Yes. That's right. Thank you so much for joining us, Ksenia Kondratieva, for giving us those important perspectives. What is also interesting here is that at the same time, you have a top diplomat from China also visiting Russia. Those developments also will closely track here. But for now, thanks very much for joining us. I was talking about China's top diplomat Wang Yi, who's en route to Russia at the moment after President Biden's visit to Kyiv and Putin's address. That's the next important development that we will have to look out for. We'll leave it at that for now. Let's turn